Should you play a Druid in Wrath of the Lich King Classic? Much like TBC, the Druid can fill 4 very distinct roles, being Balanced Druid for ranged DPS, Feral DPS, Feral Tank, and Restoration for healing. All 4 of these roles can be very useful. All 4 of these roles can perform very well. And I just want to break down the Druid in 5 to 6 minutes. I don't want this video to be particularly long, because this series is going to run alongside the What's Changed. If you haven't seen these videos, which I'm flashing up now, you're probably playing a Druid and you should go and watch them. I go in detail through all the changes for Feral, Balance, and Resto from TBC to Wrath of the Lich King. This is more of a summing up video of should you play Druid. So I will be doing one of these videos for every class. So if you don't play a Druid, but you play one of the other classes, be sure to hit the subscribe button, like the video, keep an eye out for your class because it will be coming very, very soon. Now, ultimately in Wrath of the Lich King, because you get dual spec, you can fill 2 roles. You might not want to. You might want to just be Feral DPS and then have a Feral DPS PvP spec as well. If that's the case, absolutely fine. But I think the strength of the Druid in PvE, specifically in Wrath of the Lich King, is the fact that you can fill 2 roles. So you can switch from Feral DPS to Feral Tank, because yes, you really do need 2 specs for that, unlike TBC, where you can DPS and tank in the same spec. You could even be ranged and melee, so for melee unfriendly fights you could switch to Boomy. And the gear's fairly easy to obtain in Wrath of the Lich King as well, because you're a leather user, and if you was going to go Boomy off spec, for example, you can get cloth and you can get leather. You can spam heroics, you know, it don't take that long to gear up. So let's talk first tank. If you're a Feral Tank, you probably only want to know one thing. Am I going to be needed? Yes, is the answer. Feral Tanks are very strong. Played by the right person, they can do very, very well. In fact, in Wrath of the Lich King, it still remains as my #1 off tank. And I say #1 off tank, they're absolutely fine for main tanking. But because if there's a tank swap where there's portions of the fight where you don't need to be doing anything, you can switch into Cat and still do a significant amount of damage. There's not many tanks that can do that can do a real good amount of damage whilst not actively tanking the boss. So for me, Druid always remains my favourite off-tank. Resto Druid's very, very strong. With things like Revitalize added, so you can actually give extra resources back to your raid with Wild Growth and Rejuve, that's very strong. All of your DPS are going to want hots on them all the time. You might not want to give them hots all the time, but they will want it all the time. And you do use Wild Growth on cooldown, so you will be given a lot of resources back. I would say in 10-man, they're probably one of the weaker healers. I think most people who play private servers would agree with that. Even in 25-man, they're a little bit on the weak side. Holy Paladins and Disc Priests, specifically those 2 being very, very strong, not leaving that much for Resto Druids to do. But their strength does lie in blanketing raids with hots and preemptively hotting people, knowing the damage is coming in before it comes in. So whereas your Holy Paladins and your Holy Paladins specifically and your Shamans can react to damage as it's coming in, a Disc Priest and a Resto Druid, you will be predicting that damage and getting your shields up and getting your hots out. Now, whilst Resto Druids can top healing meters, it can be done. You're still looking at certain fights and certain encounters where there's lots of raid damage going around, where your hots are getting time to tick, where you are going to creep up on those meters. I do genuinely feel that if a Resto Druid is topping the healing meter on the vast majority of fights, your Holy Paladins and Disc Priests are doing it wrong. So if you're going in wanting to smash healing meters completely as a Resto Druid, I'm not saying you haven't got the skill to do it. I just don't think the Resto Druid's got the toolkit to pull it off consistently on every fight. And then when it comes to Boomy, again, incredibly strong, a real great spec. Their AoE is phenomenal. One of the strongest AoEs in the game, with Hurricane now having no cooldown, Starfall just hitting like an absolute truck. The more mobs there are, the more DPS you do. Their single target is very, very good as well, and I feel they start particularly strong in Tier 7. If there's lots and lots of AoE going on, there's no reason why you can't be topping damage or being in the top 3. You've got a lot of competition when it comes to AoE and cleave from things like Spellhance, things like DKs, but you absolutely can do it. You know, a Boomies seriously do really, really good AoE. Single target, if you're topping damage meters, well, you shouldn't really be topping damage meters, single target. I mean, if you're slightly overgeared compared to everyone else, then it's possible. If the stars align and you're getting procs back to back on your Eclipse because you're getting lots of crits, then again, it can happen. But ultimately, if you're going in as a Boomy, you're a real strong all-rounder. Great AoE, great single target. Probably don't excel massively at either, even though on the AoE, you're on the strong side. But ultimately, there's lots of fights that are made easier with Boomies. There genuinely is fights where you will want Boomies due to their burst AoE. And then finally, Feral. Obviously, I want to keep this video fairly short because I want it just to give you my thoughts on each class, because I'm going to do this obviously for every class, like I've already said. Now, Feral DPS, specifically, we're talking about now, very high skill cap. If you're a good feral in TBC, you shouldn't have many problems with feral in RAF. I would say feral in RAF is more difficult than TBC. And you're instantly like, wait, I didn't think you power shift in RAF anymore. You don't power shift in RAF anymore due to energy changes. Check the feral video if you don't know about the changes. I'll put a link in the description to all of the Druid class changes anyway into Wrath of the Lich King. You've got a lot more juggling to do, you know, keeping Savage Roar up, keeping Rip up, you know, shredding, using your clear cast in procs, Fairy Firing on cooldown to try and force clear cast in procs for a moment of clarity. It's a lot more, I don't want to say manic, because it's not actually that manic once you get the initial opener up. So you've got everything up on the boss, you've got everything up on yourself, and then you're just spinning plates for the entire fight. But movement can be extremely punishing. You know, having to move away from a boss. If a boss does some sort of invulnerability where he wipes all your bleeds off every 30 seconds or every minute or something like that, if you've just got a 5 combo point bleed up and then they go, that can be really frustrating. And there are fights where things like that happen. But ultimately for feral, you can and will top DPS pretty much from tier 8 onwards. In tier 7, you can top DPS. You probably really need a Hysteria from a Blood DK, which increases your physical damage, but it's possible. You need a bit more luck during tier 7 to top DPS meters, getting lots of Omen of Clarity procs and things like that. Whereas in tier 8, 9, 10, once you start getting Armor Pen, doesn't matter. You don't really need luck because you're just going to hit that hard. Feral will be sort of top 2, top 3 DPS for the rest of the expansion. It's just tier 7 where you shouldn't get disheartened. Don't go in and you're 3rd or 4th getting out DPS by Shamans or DKs or Arcane Mages or whatever. You know, it doesn't matter what you're getting out DPS by. You will be beating them in future tiers. And that's it. Should you play a Druid in Wrath of the Lich King? Absolutely yes. Every spec is viable. Every spec is good. Feral, I would say, is the strongest throughout the entire expansion in terms of tanking and DPSing, but Boom is incredibly strong as well. It's only Resto I would put a little bit lower than all of those and take it from someone who started. I started the latest private server as Resto, but then I changed to Feral. Ultimately, I wanted to be Feral anyway, but it was a constant fight to try and make it look like my healing was actually doing something. There's not enough healing going around in tier 7 anyway, because the damage is not there. You know, the heals are not needed. So you haven't got anything that you can snipe heals with really outside of Swiftmend. So you do feel like a bit of a spare part. But once you get into World War 25, when there's a lot more AoE going around on the vast majority of fights, then you will feel a lot more useful. So, should you play Druid? Yes, you should play Druid, because it's the best class in World of Warcraft, always has and always will be. If you like the video, click like, subscribe to the channel for lots more content, and I'll see you on the next one.